All right, y'all, so what I want to do with this video is show you why these capital R Rect objects are so important. And you're going to notice that I'm going to keep calling them capital R Rect objects. The reason that I want to do this is capital R Rect is the object itself, and lowercase rect is the drawing command. Right? That's how you actually draw a rectangle. A capital R Rect object, though, is just like a little briefcase. Right? This thing, it can remember x, y, width, and height. So you can put a whole bunch of these objects into a list and say, hey, Python, go through each one and draw it at its x and its y and its width and its height. So I've imported everything from scene, and what I want to point out is the basic idea here. The basic structure is I'm going to have a list. Well, I guess I should explain what's going on. We're going to have asteroids. So every time I touch the screen, I'm going to make a new asteroid wherever my touch landed. So if I touch on the top right, it shows up there. If I touch the middle there, they're all going to fly to the right and wrap around to the other edge. I guess I should say to the left edge. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to say self dot, and here's the list. All right, I'm going to make a list of asteroids. And let's just do it like this. We'll just say self dot, I don't know, we can call it roster. Sure. So here, blank, there's a blank list. I've initialized this variable. There's now going to be a list. Down here inside of update, I'm going to say for each in self.roster, draw, move, wrap. Now, this doesn't matter if my roster has 1 asteroid or 1,000 asteroids. What I'm going to do for each one in that roster is draw it, move it, and then if it gets to the side, it's going to wrap back around the other way. Right? Down here, inside of my touch began folder, what I'm going to do is say, I'm going to make a new one. So my new one is going to be a rect object, and then self.roster.append new. So every time, I'm going to start, Kyle, talk. I'm going to play my code. I'm going to say there's no roster, or there's no asteroids in the roster yet. Every time I touch the screen, I'm going to make a new one, and I'm going to add it to that list. And so update's like, oh, cool, another one, big deal, I don't care. It doesn't matter if there's 1 or 2 or 600. I'm going to draw it, I'm going to move it, and I'm going to wrap it around the edge for whether, it doesn't matter how many are in my list. So let's talk about where we're going to make this, this new asteroid and how big it should be. I want it to be at the X location of my touch, and I want its Y coordinate, remember, because these rect objects have to be in the specific order. You have to give it its X and its Y coordinate, and then how wide and how high it should be. So I'm going to make it there. I'm going to make it there. Wherever my hand lands, wherever my fingertip lands, that's where I'm going to put my new asteroid. And we'll just make them 10 wide and 10 tall for now. So every time I touch a screen, there's a new asteroid. I'm going to add it to the list. All I need to do it right now is come through and draw these things. So let's say I'm going to make them ellipses. Oh, but it's a rect object. It doesn't matter. A rect object just contains those 4 pieces of information. You can draw them as circles, or you could come down here and grab this thing and draw it as, I mean, you could draw it as the 4 diamonds. I don't really care. You could draw it as Planet Cute, this little pink girl or whatever. It doesn't really matter what it is that you're drawing. The important thing is that the rect object remembers where and how big to draw the thing. So I'm going to draw it as an ellipse. And I'm going to draw each one at each one's X position, each one's Y position, each one's width, and each one's height. So hit play, tap the center, top right, bottom right. Look at me tapping all over the screen. Well, you can't really see it, but I'm like spamming multiple fingertips all over the screen right there. And there's my little rectangles. Every time I tap the screen, I'm adding a new one to the list, updates drawing them. So now let's move them around. Right? What I want to do now is say each dot x equals each dot x plus some speed number. So I don't know, let's just move them at 5. Great. Every time this thing goes by, every update, every 60th of a second, it's going to add 5 pixels to each one's X position. So when I come through and I touch this, look at there, they're all moving. Each one is updating its position. Oh, if we really wanted to have fun, change this to moved. And now I can just like, oh, isn't that cool? Oh, this looks like an EKG trace. Right? This is like when the heartbeat rhythm thing is set up. Oh, wow, look at that. That's fun. I've never done that before. Oh, I can draw cool stuff. All right, so I'm going to change this back to touch began. right? The ideas are every time I touch, it measures where my finger is. That's this right here. Touch.location is saying where is his fingertip, and I want the new asteroid's location to be wherever my fingertip lands. Right? This doesn't always have to be the truth. You could tell this thing to show up wherever the ship is or wherever the cannon is on the enemy's roster. I'm just making them create wherever my fingertip actually lands on the screen. Finally, I'm going to just wrap these around at each side. So if each.x is greater than the edge of my screen, which I think is something like that. Well, let's snap it back over to the other side. Each.x equals 0. So now, there we go. A whole bunch of these things. Right? We can have a whole bunch of these right there. The only problem is, if I set it up just like this, they're going to kind of look artificial. You'll see that same clump going by. And we saw this with like old school cartoons where they would just recycle the background and move it over and over and over and over and over again. We can get around that pretty easily. What I could do would be to import random. And this time, instead of just snapping it back around to the left-hand side, I'm going to say I want its new position rand int somewhere between like -100 and -50, and I'm going to say each.y equals plus random. Actually, no, let's just have each one show up in a new random y position. 0, I don't know, 834, sure. So now, when these three things get to the edge of the screen, they're going to be kind of staggered at new x positions, and they're also going to be showing up at new y positions too. All right? You can notice that this is not going to be the same shape each time that these little clusters go through. I mean, these kind of look like constellations or whatever, but just to make my point a little bit clearer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those 5 will not be in that same coordinate, or that same pattern each time they go through. So if we have a ton of these things on here, this could be like a realistic looking background for you for like a space shooter. Now, one thing that Rect objects can't do is remember more than these. All right, they can remember only their x, their y, their width, and their height. There's not a way with the Rect object to directly say, oh, also, you should remember your speed. I want you going faster than you. I want you to have a bigger speed. I want you to have a slower speed or whatever. There's a way we can kind of fake this, though, that's pretty awesome. What I'm going to do instead is, instead of making them all 10 big, I'm going to have them have a random width. So random.randint somewhere between, let's just say 3 and 10. So each one is going to have a width between 3 and 10, and I want them to be little circles, so I'm also going to make each one to have the same height between 3 and 10. So now we can see that some are bigger than the other, right? We've got smaller ones and bigger ones on there. One thing that we can do to make a really cool depth effect is to make the ones that are bigger move faster. Because if they're moving faster, your brain's going to think that that means that they are closer to the screen. It provides a really nifty little depth effect. So what I'm going to do over here is, instead of making each one move by 5 pixels, I'm going to have each one move by its own width each time. So now, oh man, that's fun right there. Right? That is a cool depth effect. Of course, these aren't really all circles, are they? Yeah, some of these are ellipses. Oh, you know why? This is why. Let's make some variable called z. I want to make sure that the width and the height are the same. So each one is going to have the exact same width and height. That way they'll all come out as being nice little circles. Let's see. Oh yeah, that looks so much cooler. All right, there we go. So now I've got this sweet little depth effect background. And of course, if you really wanted these things to look like stars, then instead of drawing them as an ellipse, what we could do is draw an actual picture of a star. All right, so I can come in through here, and I'm going to say, all right, I want each one, instead of that, to be an image. And if I were to go to Space Shooter Art, oh, there might be pictures of stars in here somewhere, maybe. Yeah, here we go. Let's just use that one. Well, that's not what you wanted to see, and that's my physics lecture right there coming up later today. Kyle, there we go. So now we've got these cool little backgrounds going. All right, big idea. Make an empty roster when you hit start. Use touch or some function to create an instance of a new capital R Rect object. Add it to this list right here, and then use a for loop in your update thing to say, hey, for each of the stars in that list, or each of the asteroids or whatever, I think I've gone back and forth between there, draw it, move it, and handle what happens when it hits the edge. Right? And you can mess with the width and the speed and everything to make this really cool 3D effect. Let me just spam a bunch of these on here, see how many you can handle. My iPad's one on the older side, so I imagine it might start getting laggy here if I get up to like 20,000 of these things. Let's find out. You can hear me just tapping fingertips as fast as possible on there. Yeah. All right, that is pretty cool. All right, y'all. Hopefully this helps. We're going to play around with this more on Friday when we come back together.